So with that, I am going to, in a moment, welcome our next speaker to the stage. Her name, or she is, Senator Crystal Asige from the Republic of Kenya. She's a singer-songwriter, an equity and inclusion consultant, a disability rights advocate, an accessibility auditor, and a public speaker. Crystal also leads and consults on projects surrounding accessible cities, as well as inclusive transport and infrastructure, and is an Amnesty International Kenya board member. So with that, I'm going to welcome Crystal to the stage. And I hope you all enjoy her speech.
I don't need that, and the water is where?
The water is there, and it's down so we can't drop it.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, although I must confess that I didn't really want to end up here. I really didn't want to end up here, even though as a senator, but as a young Black female senator with a disability experiencing life in the global South. I didn't really want to end up being here. As soon as I was comfortable in my skin, there was racism. As soon as I was confident in my femininity, there was sexism. As soon as I was proud of my youth, there was ageism. And now that I am comfortable with my disability, there is ableism. Studies show that no group is further behind than young Black women and girls with disabilities in Africa because we carry multiple burdens of discrimination. We are 4 times more likely to suffer GBV, 3 times more likely to lack healthcare, 3 times more likely to be illiterate, 2 times less likely to be employed, and 2 times less likely to use the internet. We are disproportionately uneducated, unemployed, exploited, impoverished, and abused. These are our odds, and I had never wanted to end up here. As a young teenager, my eyesight began to steadily decline from a progressive eye condition called glaucoma, through which I acquired my disability later in life. I now live as a visually impaired person, but I personally prefer the term VIP. I had to start again to accept, to adapt, unlearn, relearn, and in doing so, I realized that this is not disability. This is disability. It's not the white cane or the wheelchair, the hearing aid or the prosthetic that is the barrier. The inaccessible environment is. Let me give you a quick equation of disability. It's equated as impairment plus barrier equals disability. For example, if the lights went off in this room right now and it was pitch black, all of you, I assume, who don't have visual impairment would struggle reading. But I, as a visually impaired person, wouldn't struggle reading. And that would make you disabled in that example. So impairment plus barrier equals disability. Impairment being that you don't have a superpower of reading at night. The barrier being the lights being cut off. And the disability, you understand my point. Buildings, streets, products, services, and technologies are made inaccessible to us, making our odds what they are. It was only when I went to university in the UK that I was exposed to these realities. Being a young girl from a small island off the coast of Kenya, Mombasa, I never knew that there was anything like audio prompts on streetlights. I never knew that there were buses that could lower to street level. I never knew that there was anything like tactile paving, roller balls at the bottom of the traffic lights. I didn't even know that there was anything called a sonic traffic light. I did not know that there were signages which have specific colors so that they are well contrasted for those with low vision. I never knew that you could cross the road at a pedestrian crossing and cars actually stop voluntarily, unlike in Africa where it's just a polite suggestion when you expect them to stop for you to cross the road. It's because of this exposure that I understood that I was further disabled because of living in Kenya, because there were visually impaired persons in the UK that were living life quite independently, unlike I. So I now had the vision, but I needed a way for others to see. In Africa, women are the backbone of society, with most of our responsibilities needing us to walk or use public transport daily. Women own the majority of small businesses. For example, kiosks, salons, barbers, roadside food stands, mobile money stalls, and other menial labor jobs. Add that to studies that show that 73% of women either walk or use public transport in cities, and a fifth of those have disabilities. Inclusive transport and mobility is not just about buildings and streets. It's absolutely connected to our self-efficacy, dignity, independence, safety, confidence, equity, and inclusion. So I became a senator last year. In October, I was sworn in. And now, in my role as a member of parliament, I'm advocating for legislating for the disabled, educating the non-disabled, empowering inclusion champions, and working to influence sector policies on infrastructure that include all types of users in Kenya. The bills that I am currently sponsoring include the Persons with Disabilities Bill, the Kenya Sign Language Bill, the Learners with Disabilities Bill, and I am currently trying to amend our Road Act to include universal design, our National Transport Sector Authority Act to also include universal design, and many other different amendments for county governments, and also, hopefully, a constitutional amendment to be more inclusive of persons with disabilities. And I'm using a piece of research that I was a part of, sponsored by High Volume Transport, an FCDO, which was the Road Node 21. We worked on the Road Node 21 a couple of years ago with a bunch of consultants between Africa, India, and the UK. I was one of the researchers on that project, and it's involved us revamping, giving it a facelift, because the Road Node 21 was 20 years old at the time that we got our hands on it, meaning that its technologies were old, its case studies were old, its implementation recommendations were also old, and we included we cited issues and solutions that were more relevant to today's world. And I'm using that same piece of research to inform what I'm doing in Parliament, because why would I have worked on something that I'm not willing to use myself? But accessibility is not a one and done. A climate change angle is also involved, absolutely. Though Africa includes only 4% of global greenhouse emissions, it is most vulnerable to climate change because we lack mitigation structures. Prioritizing accessibility also prioritizing climate action that is inclusive, or inclusive climate action. That means Africa needs sustainable and climate resilient materials as well. This will automatically prioritize our people, our access to walking, public transport, and lead to healthier cities and increased well-being for our people and overall a reduction of our emissions. However, when I have focus groups and I speak to people in my community, have this one complaint, this one point of view that I can never really answer or give a reason for, which is that it seems that the global north have been the ones to exacerbate climate change over the last several decades. And now they are looking at the global south to help them reduce and partake and participate in climate action. That is a question that I'm always asked, and perhaps we can have answers in the 4 or 5 days that we're here together this week. If people with disabilities in Africa could leave their homes and safely access buildings, streets, and services, how much more dignified lives could we have at living? I know what it's like to be invisible, to be lost in statistics. Life has really kicked me in the ass, and I'm sorry, that's not very parliamentary language. Half of it has been discriminatory society. Part of it has been a discouraged spirit on my part. And a lot of it has been because of folks who are responsible for designing, developing, and implementing our infrastructure. And that, I suppose, lies in the people in this room to reflect on. You are the one creating and designing the world that people like me live in. You are designing and creating the world that people like me look to have a career in. People like me look to start families in. People like me look to get an education, access healthcare, and just live an independent life as possible. That responsibility lies on practitioners like yourselves. I ask of you to consider a few options. How can we start training maybe even 10,000 government officials and practitioners and engineers in Africa on universal design and its importance? And I don't just mean training in a seminar, the regular traditional types of training. When I trained engineers and government officials in Kenya on the same several years back and in my work, I actually sat an engineer down in a wheelchair for the day. I tied up the legs of an urban planner and made him try to function for a day. I blindfolded people. I simulated people being deaf. All of them were people who helped to design our roads and our buildings. And that was the way that they could understand what people like myself go through on a day-to-day basis. Because it's not just about, a pavement that you're designing. It's not just about a drop curb. It's not just about traffic crossings. It's not just about that. It's about who is going to use this? How are they going to get to school? Will they get home from work safely? Will they be able to live dignified? Will they be scared of being attacked on the way to a meeting? Just the other day, last week actually in Kenya, there was a report in the news whereby an intellectually disabled PSV passenger was attacked in one of our public buses because they could not communicate about payment. And so the conductor of that bus and whoever it was that was responsible, because the report is not conclusive yet, attacked him just because there was a communication barrier due to his intellectual disability. And that is the transport systems that we are having to live in. The exposure that I talked about earlier, about going to the UK and living there, and being able to see things and experience things that I'd never, ever thought that were possible for people like myself. Just the sheer freedom that I had. I didn't have to call anybody to take me out. I didn't have to ask anyone to walk me to the park. I didn't have to get anyone to help me in and out of a bus. Do you know how freeing that feels like for a person who is locked away in darkness every single day? Even right now, as I stand in front of you, absolute darkness. But still, in European countries, people have freedoms, even though it's not as free as yourselves as non-disabled people. Disabled people have some freedoms here, but Africa, we are lacking in it completely. And the projects that you have in the global north, the global south, the communities that you support, the designs that you come up with for our streetscapes are all pegged on not just, like I say, cement and stones. It's actually pegged on the people's ability to live a dignified and free life. We also need to incorporate these PWD users in our designs, in our development, and in the deliveries of all of our projects. How can we start doing that more often? Instead of sitting in this room with maybe only myself as a disabled person, how could we next year get more PWDs to sit in here and give their personal accounts? People with diverse disabilities, because when you've met one visually impaired person, you've only met one. My experiences are not the same as the next VIP that you will meet. How can we start getting those voices on the table, those voices in our projects, those voices on boards? I throw myself into this work because I'm crazy about everyone feeling seen and heard. And that's why I ask this of you. I don't think that, or I know that I didn't want to be here, but I needed to be here because my disability has turned into my ability to speak and to fight and to legislate for those who couldn't do it on their own. And unfortunately, in Senate, as a member of Parliament, I am the only young, black, female parliamentarian with a visual disability. I'm only one out of over 400. So when I say it's hard, I'm telling you it's hard. My voice isn't loud enough. It doesn't permeate far enough as one. That's why I appreciate forums like this where I'm able to speak and call on you all to support me with my bills, collaborate. How can we continue collaborating? How can the gender conversation also include not just women in transport, but women with or without disabilities in transport? Those two should be synonymous. There shouldn't be a session separate for gender and a session separate for disability. I don't see that as sustainable or effective as it could be. And also, how can we start talking about the importance of human resource when we are sitting and talking about building stations and transit hubs and so on and so forth? Can we start focusing on the importance of the staff who are trained to serve persons with disabilities? Because trust me, on my way here to Germany, to Leipzig, I had a heck of a time. I have not slept in what feels like days, because even though the infrastructure is much better than Africa, the service providers, the training of the staff, I feel isn't better. There's less compassion here. I felt that there was less understanding here, even though you have it all, in quotation. But in Africa, even though we don't have this infrastructure that you have, the abilities that you have to build and develop your infrastructure, your buildings and streets, we have people who have hearts, who will say, "Oh, Crystal, you need help? Come, let me help you." Today I was yelled at or looked at badly for not being able to walk as quickly as I could onto the long distance train here. People were annoyed at me for taking my time because they didn't understand. They didn't have the time to understand. So how can we start talking about that? The importance of people. It's not just the buildings and the streets that we should talk about and focus on. It's the people that are assisting vulnerable users who really probably count even more. These are some of my thoughts, and I don't want to take up all of too much more time, but I hope to hear more of sessions going on, and I think I'll be here for the rest of the week. If there's conversations that you would love to have with me, please come and see me, because I can't see you clearly. I won't be able to approach you, so please do approach me. I appreciate your time very much, and thank you again. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Crystal, for sharing your experiences and your words. Please, people will find you and talk with you, I'm sure. I would really feel privileged to be in this room to hear the story and understand, yes, it's the stories of multiple people that we do need to be hearing from. And yeah, I would challenge all of you that are part of event organization to bring more people with disabilities to your conversations, because we need to hear these diverse stories and bring them to the tables.